or I can at least point you to resources that are going to be helpful to you. The first thing that I like to point out is they have actually done studies on what the most common errors are in terms of grammar. They did a longitudinal study, so it means it took several years to do, from undergraduates across the country, and these are the top 20. So you'll notice, right, missing commas in a lot of different areas. Wrong or missing words, verb endings, sentence fragments, misplaced or dangling modifier, and then you'll notice, right, it's, your, there, and there, those kinds of confusion, right? Because one thing I tell my students all the time is if you're counting on Microsoft Word, catching those kinds of mistakes, it's not going to do it. Because if you spell the word correctly, that's all it's looking for. It doesn't have the smarts to be able to figure out the context of the sentence and understand that that's the wrong word for that particular sentence. Yes, like then and then, absolutely. What's another one? I get students to do weather and weather, as in like whether or not, or the weather outside. That's another big one. So excuse me, I always tell them to start with this. The most important thing is, because if I were to ask each one of you in this room and our person online what your own tendencies are, you would probably tell me something completely different, right? Because each one of you has your own strengths and your own areas that are in need of improvement. And this depends on the teachers that you had growing up. This depends on your own experience with writing, depends on your own interest areas. You'd be amazed as to how your past teachers have influenced you. I had a graduate professor who hated the word utilize, would not grade a paper if you had that word in the paper. So I, to this day, do not use the word utilize, just based on that one professor. And so, again, okay, yes, well, it's too late. Now it's just, you're trained to do this. And again, so if you think back on certain professors, right, that you've had, or maybe high school teachers, we get a lot of students that still have these sort of lingering, what I would call preferences, as opposed to actual rules. And then we have to kind of combat that a little bit. So first and foremost, let me just double check. There is a difference between grammar and style. Style are the choices that writers make, like how you put your sentences together, word choice, things like that. Grammar is the actual rules, where I can point you to like a grammar handbook, and there is a very black and white kind of a rule, although the English language is beautiful in the fact that once you find out the rule, there's an exception to that rule. But grammar is the one where it's standard, accepted, academic, English. So that would be how I'm using the word grammar in this particular workshop. So you guys tell me, what do we want to talk about? Do we want to start with these 20? Is there something else that you have a burning desire to know how to do? Usually I get really scared faces, but the good news is that, again, if it's grammar, that means that there is a knowable rule for you. I do not have special grammar DNA. It's just I do this all day, every day. That's the only difference, right, is that I practice with this. I actually started my career as an editor for an academic press, and then I did editing work for an online journal, and I helped pay for my my graduate education by being a proofreader and editor for the engineering students at Texas A&M. So, because editors, I'm telling you, if you know how to do this, and if you know how to proofread and edit your own work, people will pay you for these skills. The Writing Center actually has a list of proofreaders that our students will contact and pay like $2 a page or $20 an hour. And so this is why, again, I think these skills are so important. Because even if you are the world's smartest person, if you can't get that knowledge to actually come out in a way that makes sense to other people, no one will know, right, the genius, right, and the things that you want to be able to tell them. So, okay, what do you want to think way back? What do professors tend to mark on your papers? What's something that comes up?
I would like to say something about, we have some background about British English. So sometimes we write the papers in a British way, but probably the graders, say we're wrong. So how can we deal with that? So it's, American English and British English. Some grammar, is kind of different usage. So I don't know how to deal with that. We get into trouble.
Okay. For our online person, the question is how to deal with British English versus American English. And you're right. Unfortunately, the professor or the grader is going to have personal preferences, and most of the professors here are going to want you to be working with standard American English as opposed to British. And so that'll be spelling. That'll be. I'm trying to think. I don't know of a difference in sentence construction. It's mostly just spelling, is it not? Or are you thinking of something more specific?
I think that you said where there's some preference. Sometimes they use the compound sentence. So we would like to use maybe a little bit higher, use the like a past participle, this kind of word instead of some of the independent sentence. So go higher on some of the way, make the structure, make the sentence more simple and advanced. But they think we are wrong, so it's kind of a confusion.
Okay, that I don't know how to address, because as long as the sentence is grammatically correct, it shouldn't matter if it's just an independent clause or if it's a compound one that actually has, restrictive elements and things in there. So if that's what's happening, you need to talk to the grader or the professor, and you need to be able to point to this rules and say that if it's grammatically correct, that should not have been marked wrong. Now, it's possible that they're saying that maybe it's a little too complex and they weren't able to discern what you meant, which does sometimes happen. I had one student last year who loved to write really long, complex sentences, and sometimes based on audience, that's not going to be the best style choice. And so sometimes I would say, okay, I'm not really sure what you mean here. Is there a way to either define your terms or use a different word or something like that? But it wasn't this is wrong, like this is grammatically incorrect. So I would absolutely, if you're having that with your professors, go talk to them, make those appointments, have them walk you through those comments, and explain what it is that they're looking for. Because as I'm sure you guys have figured out, each professor has a little bit sort of different set of objectives and course goals that they're trying to push you towards, and so they're going to be looking for those specific things in their classes. Yes, sir?
I'm running into issues with active and passive voice.
Yes.
I think mostly here they like to have active voice because it reads smoother, faster, quicker.
Yes.
But sometimes you go in a passive voice and it kind of messes things up. It's hard sometimes to speak about the past in an active voice. Maybe you can talk about that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I just want to make sure past tense is not the same as passive. So if you are using just the past tense form of a verb, that should still be considered active. Most of the time, passive is when you start adding those helper verbs onto the main verb so that you've got like a longer verb phrase. And so that is my understanding and definition of passive versus active. It usually happens also when you switch the order of the sentence. So instead of the person who's doing the action being close to the verb, right, so I taught today's lecture on grammar workshop, right? So that's past tense, right, of that verb, but it's still active because I'm the one who's doing the action and I'm there with that verb. That's a combination. Instead, passive would be if I flipped that around. The workshop was taught by me. And so now was taught, right, the workshop was taught, that's passive because now the person who's doing the action is at the end of the sentence. And instead I've put the workshop at the beginning, which is sort of the object of the action. It's getting the action sort of received onto it. That's the easiest way I can think of to kind of understand what that difference is. So absolutely, you can still use past tense because, I mean, a lot of you guys in your seminary classes are going to be talking about historical events, right, histories, things of that nature, and so absolutely, so you can still do that past tense, but then just double check the number of verbs you have happening in that verb phrase. And so if it's have been helping or something like that, see if there's a way to rearrange that sentence that just has maybe sort of one major verb. Yes, sir? The easiest way, and this is going to sound silly, is once you have a draft going, is to just go through and circle or highlight every single verb that you can find so that way, as you're going through your own proofreading or editing process, that you can double check those verbs. The English language is another crazy language in that there are over 30 different tenses. So it's actually very, very complicated. Obviously, the major ones are past, present, and future, but then you have the ones, right, so you've got progressive, you have past or present or future perfect, and so then it really depends on what you want to be conveying in your sentence, right? So if it's a simple action like past, present, or future, right, then that's pretty simple. It happened in the past, it is currently happening, or it will happen in the future. If it's progressive, then that's usually an ing verb, right? And so then that tends to then say progressive, right? So it means it is still in progress. So if you want to say that I am teaching, that means I am currently in the act of teaching, and that's a different sentence. It tells you more information about the fact that it says I teach grammar workshops, right? So that's present tense, I teach, but that doesn't give you really any information about how that's done or when that's done. So I would say it also then depends on, and I always ask my students, what do you want to tell me, right, with this particular sentence? And once you can figure that out, that should hopefully indicate to you verb tense. So is it something that happened in the past but is still having a result now? That's most of the time that's going to be like a past perfect, right? So something that happened but has sort of a residual effect that comes into the present tense. Or again, like a progressive where it's either still happening, it started in the past but is still happening. And so again, there's just little tiny nuances there. Any good Google search, right, if you're looking for this, any good grammar website, a lot of writing centers have amazing resources. Our writing center does not yet at the moment, but my mentors are working on it. But the two that I really love are, I actually helped run Texas A&M's writing center when I was there as a graduate student, but I also love Purdue's online writing lab, the OWL, O-W-L. And they will have resources for you on these kinds of things, and they'll break down the different major types of tenses. Because obviously, I'll confess something to you, I don't have all 30 memorized. Even I have to go back and look at some of the more rare ones. But it'll be able to break down for you the major ones, like the past perfect, right, present perfect, future perfect, and the progressives, and then the major simple tenses. And it'll give you examples on what the difference is so that you can really understand when you should be using those different tenses. And the other good news is I promise you, even though it seems unusual now, the more you work with it, the more natural it will seem. And then pretty soon you'll notice that you don't have to do that highlighting of the verbs in your major papers, right, in your drafts. You'll start to do it automatically the more aware you are of what your own writing tendencies are. These are great questions. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Is this a double infinitive to go to?
Actually, no, because an infinitive is a to plus a verb, and so what you have is an infinitive phrase, and then you have a preposition after that. So to go to the store. So to go is your infinitive phrase, and the to the store is my prepositional phrase that tells you where I'm going to.
There's always that problem with double infinitive is what they say. I don't know.
I've actually never heard of anyone refer to it as a double infinitive. Because really all they're referring to is that you've put a preposition after the verb.
And also ending a sentence with a preposition.
That one is actually not a rule. That is a teacher preference. It is pretty common. I've heard that my entire academic career that teachers really are not fond of that, but it's not necessarily an actual rule that you'd potentially be able to point to. In those cases, as you guys have already started to figure out, have those conversations with your professors as to what they are going to be marking and what they're going to be noticing. And unfortunately, what may be true for one professor is going to be completely the opposite for another professor. Now, and I will say, if you do end almost every sentence with a preposition, then that is going to be something that stands out and is distracting. So in that case, I would definitely say vary your sentence construction so that not all sentences are worded and put together in the same way. Just like if I had a student that began every sentence with one of those introductory phrases, comma, and then the main part of the sentence, after 4 or 5 of those, you get in a rhythm and it starts to be something then that the reader really notices and comes distracting. So in those cases, then that's something like we were mentioning earlier, right, where the better you know your own writing and the more you can kind of figure out what those tendencies are, then the more you can kind of figure those things out. And then in your proofreading and editing revision stages, can go back and start to move some of those things around.
I have a specific question. For example, we have two uncountable nouns, A and B. So you think the B word, we use the plural or single?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The question is, for example, so there is a noun, we say A is the uncountable, and another noun, O, uncountable. So A and B, they are both uncountable nouns. So if we use the verb, so B word, so we use is, we use are. Because my computer is totally disagree about use are. So they correct me as is, but we have some of the question about that they use are. I don't know, I confused is correct or is incorrect.
Well, and I will tell you, Microsoft Word is wrong just as often as it is right. So try to actually to ignore that little green squiggly line, because while sometimes it might be helpful, a lot of times it's actually more distracting and is actually telling you to correct something it's actually telling you to correct it into an error. So if it's helpful to you, leave that grammar check on. If it's not helpful to you, go into the menu and turn it off, and then I would get one of these. I've made enough students buy these over my 2 years here at Swibbits that I guarantee you there's some half-price books, right, of copies of these floating around. But also there's these fun ones, like I love Grammar Girl. She's very hilarious in the way she talks about grammar. So I would use a handbook and begin to figure out like you're already doing what your own tendencies are, and just turn off that grammar checker in Microsoft Word. I would say, oh, sorry, what? Oh, yes, yeah, sorry, absolutely. You hand these things to you. Yeah, and I've used all of these in grammar classes because I've been teaching at the college level now for over 10 years. So it also depends on, the school, which one they require. But all of those are amazing and are helpful to you if that way you have something that you can just say, okay, what was that rule again? Let me flip to that and be able to find it really easily. Okay, but so, and I think the reason I was initially confused is when you said A and B, I was thinking that you had like a compound noun. Right, so this and this, and so obviously in that case you would use are, right, because you have two nouns that are forming the subject of the sentence, and so then if there's two things, you always have to have a plural verb. But you're talking about.
We can consider for maybe A and B. Maybe later I'll show you this sentence.
Yes, yeah, and these are the cases where it's very obvious that I'm a visual person, and if I can't visualize it, then I'm having difficulty with it. Usually the rule in standard American English is if it's one of those, what we call them collective nouns, right, the noun that can be plural or singular depending on the usage. So let's say this group, right? If I'm referring to all of you inside of the group as one unit, so the group is, yes, absolutely, is sitting in this room. However, if we say the group, let's say we want to break that down into something where you guys would be coming up with different opinions on something, or breaking up into like half here and half here, then we would use the plural because it's still the singular. It looks singular with group, but I'm referring to you now as individuals within that group, and you'll use the plural verb. Anytime. No, because that collective nouns are very tricky, and then again, that's when context becomes essential. And so again, are you talking about it as sort of a unit, or are you talking about the individual aspects that make up that unit, and that'll determine whether you do singular versus plural. Yes, no, absolutely. No, and this sounds silly, but when in doubt, if you can't figure it out and you've been looking for the rule, see if the beauty and the danger of the English language is there's about 27 different ways to write one particular thing. So that's always then my suggestion as well, is if you get stuck, see if there's another way to write the sentence in which that problem that you're coming across no longer exists in the sentence. How are we doing? Oh, we're almost out of time, actually, because it's already 11:30. I'm telling you, 20 minutes goes by incredibly quickly. Any kind of final questions or resources I can point you guys to? Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Obviously, these kinds of websites that I brought up here are helpful. So if you know that you have like missing commas, if you just Google, and all I do to get to here is top 20 errors in student writing, and so this will come up, and you'll notice that it actually does do an explanation of each one of those patterns. Because I don't know if this applies to you, but sometimes I just get students that say, well, I have a problem with commas. And then my automatic response is, well, what kind of commas? So it's really helpful the more familiar you are with your writing to figure out what your particular patterns are. Because as you'll notice from this list, there's several different types of commas, usually based on where they fall in the sentence and what part of the sentence they're modifying or separating. So the more specific you can get, then the more specific your help can be, right? And even in these, then, it's broken up, usually punctuation, into the types of commas and things like that. So this is always helpful, and I've done this with students in the past. I'm happy to send these to you. I have just basic PowerPoint presentations that kind of walk you through the different types of punctuation. And this one, even though it seems scary, is supposed to always show my students there's only a finite number of sentences that are even possible for you to construct. And so again, while it seems scary, hopefully that helps you wrap your brain around this. This is it, right? That's the only way that you can actually construct a sentence, right? I think there's only 7. And the same thing with commas. If I'm remembering correctly, there's only 8 comma rules. And so again, right, just because you don't know them now, 8, right, should be easy for you to kind of work with and learn and then be able to apply in your own writing. And so if you guys want this PowerPoint, let me know, or I think we might be able to put it up on YouTube. Okay, so then here, right, you'll notice I've started walking through the different kinds of commas and where they go in the sentences. And so introductory phrases, and then it even has sort of like some examples in here, right? I'll always walk through with my students and have them talk to me as a class about, right, where would the comma go with those introductory elements. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, number 2 is the one that makes them laugh. That would be the comma that needs to be there to avoid confusion. But also after is an adverb, and if you begin a sentence with an adverb, that should hopefully then begin to trigger for you in your brain that, oh, I'm starting my sentence with potentially an introductory element, so let me look at how this works. And the good rule of thumb here is to figure out where's your main subject and your main verb. And if it's in the middle of the sentence, then that's a good indicator that what comes before is an introductory element, and you're going to need the comma after that introductory element to tell your reader where the main subject and verb start. So obviously right after eating is just an additional phrase that tells you when, but really the sentence is, our cat took a nap, right? That's the main part of the sentence. It could stand alone if it needed to. The rest of it is just extra. So, but again, it gets a little more complicated. Tons of my students tend to get tripped up by essential versus non-essential, or you may have had a high school teacher who called it restrictive versus non-restrictive. Exactly the same thing, they just call it different aspects. And again, there's more practice. Commas with adjectives, unnecessary commas, semicolons and colons, the apostrophe, hyphens, other punctuation, dashes, parentheses, and here's another one of my favorites, the dangling or misplaced modifier. So you'll notice I put this together over the years of having to have this conversation several times a semester with different students. And I've even added some here at the end about transitions between paragraphs and within paragraphs. If you've ever had a professor say, hey, I have no idea how you got from this paragraph to this paragraph, right? Usually they might mark poor organization or abrupt shift in thought or something like that. Then I've added some of those slides there at the end. The best thing I can encourage you to do is, if you don't have one of these, get a grammar handbook that you can flip through. I tend to love the ones that are spiral bound, so I can lay it down and right in front of where I'm typing and just be able to go with it. And one of the reasons my students call me Queen of Mean is one of the assignments I make them do in English 1 is they have to actually chart their personal writing problems in my class. Once we get to the end of the semester, they have to go back through all of their papers and chart every single comment that I've made on all of the previous papers. I know, it's evil. It really is. It's diabolical. But it's good for them, because then they start to figure out, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing over the course of a semester, and it's so much easier to then see what your patterns are. If you make one mistake in one area like 2 times the whole semester, then obviously that's not a major concern for you. But if you start to notice then over 4 months that it's consistently commas with an introductory element, then you find it right in the index in the back, you flip to that, and it's something very, very easy for you to figure out. And so for each paper for me, they have to tell me the error, they have to tell me the number of times it occurred in the paper, and then they have to tell me the strategy or rule that they have found, looking it up and doing some research on it, that'll help them overcome that in the future. And then they have to do a little summary statement for me at the end. So I know that sounds like super fun for you guys and not like you don't have enough going on in your lives. But if you've got a chance to kind of look back through what your professors are commenting on, particularly in your seminary papers, it might be a useful exercise for you to kind of figure out, okay, are they marking the same things over and over again? I actually have had students come talk to me, and he had circled every single comma in his draft for English 1 and just wanted to sit there and talk to me and kind of walk me through it and ask me about the rules so he could start practicing with it. Whatever you guys need to do to be successful. And that's actually what my writing center does. My mentors have hopefully been trained. If they have not, you come find me, and we'll make sure this happens. But they've been trained to help you identify what your own patterns are so that way we're helping you individually become better writers. Because your professors, the writing center, even your friends, right, or my college students have, right, the aunt who's an English teacher who proofreads the paper for them. Whatever it is, we're supposed to be the training wheels, right? And at some point you should be able to take those off and be able to do it on your own, because that's the point, right, is to get you to be able to do this in your own writing process so that you're better, faster. I almost said stronger, right? So, which is a Kanye West song accidentally that it's like snuck into my head. I don't know how that happened. Thank you, yeah. Anyway, but so, and I'm now way over time. But if you guys have any additional questions or comments, please let me know. I'm super easy to find. Currently, my office is in the boys' dorm. That's where the college faculty is. My name is Sarah Spring, so my email address is just sspring@swibbits.edu. So if you ever have any questions or comments, please let me know. This is what I love to do. My degree is actually in rhetoric and composition, so didn't even get a degree on the literature side of things. I actually love the writing side. So thank you guys so much for your attention, and best of luck with your papers. Mr.